Goslin will be our guest speaker this evening. Local historian, author, producer. She's going to give you a little insight on the black families in Gettysburg during the battle and after the battle of Gettysburg. Is that correct?
Yep, and more. And more.
Okay, so enjoy your evening. Thank you again.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. Brian, could you get the music?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, thanks, everyone. It's nice to see you. I'd like to get a little feel for what brought you here other than the good food. So I'm Deb. I'm a little apple picker. I grew up on Yellow Hill on my grandfather's fruit farm. And I discovered there was a pre-Civil War African-American community at Yellow Hill. And they had a church. But white people burned the black people's church down. And I thought, wow, why don't we know about that? So I tried to research it. Haven't found the exact date. We'll probably never know who did it. People said they knew who did it, but they were taking it to their graves because people's families were among the community, and truly, it could be my relatives, for all I know. So there are mysteries to Yellow Hill, but there are answers. So so through my research on Yellow Hill, where my grandfather lived, not far, near Arntsville here, and we have people here with us who live there on Yellow Hill, the Hults. And so I stumbled onto this fascinating information, and then I found more connections to Gettysburg. And so I do a tour of African-American history in Gettysburg. It is not often requested. I was a member of the Visitor Center Convention Bureau for a number of years. It just was a hard sell. There were just not a big demand for it. I do it upon request. So this was a course I taught at the community college, just based on things I stumbled upon that I thought were fascinating about our history here. So I wrote a book about Yellow Hill, and that's on Amazon.com. It's at the Historical Society, and they get the proceeds if you buy it at the Gettysburg history site. My website's Gettysburg Histories, and the Adams County Historical Society has taken GettysburgHistory.com as their. What a great idea! And so there is a little confusion there, but I'm delighted. I'm going to be doing 3 lectures there. April 13th, the subject will be Mary Jemison. June 23rd, it'll be George Washington Sandow, first soldier killed at Gettysburg, a relative of mine. I descend from the Sandow family, and we share 2 great-grandfather. And then the third one is about Kitty Payne and kidnappings of free blacks pre-Civil War. But we're going to talk about African-American communities, so welcome. I see the Confederate hat. We're here in Cashtown. Great Confederate story. Are you from the area?
Well, I'm actually 1 hour and a half north from Huntington County.
Oh, okay.
So I just like history.
Cool.
I have all kinds of keppies. This
All right.
just happened to be the color I
This
wore
is the one you wore today. All right. And you just get drug along to these Civil War things.
I enjoy it.
Oh, good. Good.
Over
Well,
the years, she's starting
But I
to.
enjoy this.
you're good. 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 How about over here?
We're basically visitors from out of state, and we're big history buffs when it comes to the Civil War.
Good. Great.
We come back here.
Good. Well, I hope you learned some fascinating things. I know this is Bruce, the Cashtown historian. Am I right? And
I am actually a descendant of one of the owners of Cashtown Inn from 1863.
awesome. What family?
Mickley.
Mickley. I had Aunt Sarah Mickley from over here. So my Aunt Sarah Sandow is probably related to you.
Probably related.
And good to see you again.
The halls.
Thank you. And your friends?
They brought us, and it's wonderful.
Oh, good, good. I hope you learned. You're from the area?
Yeah.
You're from the area?
No, we're from Warren.
Warren?
Yep.
All right.
We love it down here.
But we're looking to buy a house down here. So
You're a frequent flyer and you want to live here.
Yeah.
We will share the land with you. I meet a lot of people like you. They just want to move here.
And we come down for Remembrance Day weekend, and we dress period, and we have a great
Oh,
time.
good, good, good. Bringing history alive. Great.
We just discovered this series on Facebook and
That's
started.
it.
This is our 3rd one,
Good.
and this is actually the one I'm most interested in.
Oh, good, good, good. And that's my friend Dave. So we're going to videotape this, put it on YouTube. I do have a For the Cause Productions on YouTube. There's an African-American film that I did about Gettysburg, some of the things that we're talking about. It's called Gettysburg Revisited under For the Cause Productions YouTube. So I hope to give you some ideas, more reading, more things to learn about. So I'm related to George Sando, first soldier killed. There's a monument for him on the Gettysburg battlefield. I grew up here not having a clue. I learned about him by reading a book at her tavern one night at a business dinner. I just picked up a book, opened it. George Sando, they brought in the body. It was Days of Darkness by William Williams. And I'm like, who's this guy? So I researched him, and I wanted to write a book about George, but I never did. But I stumbled onto this, Yellow Hill, and wrote and published that book and learned about things to do tours in Gettysburg and the Underground Railroad near Yellow Hill, where the Quakers were. So we're going to delve into this. Let me just push things on out here. So again, related to the first soldier killed. 20 years old, just married in the spring of 1863, enlisted the 23rd, died the 26th. Not a very long life. Only private soldier on the Gettysburg battlefield to have a monument erected in his honor. Only private. Okay, I found this to be incredible. Do you know at the Adams County Historical Society, they have the manumission document of Clem Johnson. It's dated 1831, and he had been enslaved by Francis Scott Key. Francis Scott Key traveled with Clem and they lived in Carroll County, Maryland. We all know him, why he's famous for writing a poem that became a song that's our national anthem. And the land of the free and the home of the brave, land of the free. Wonder what Clem Johnson thought when he heard people congratulating him for those words. Because Clem was 45 years old who paid $5 to Francis Scott Key for his freedom in 1831. And that was 17 years after he penned these words, 17 years after that. So there's questions. There's a book, Jefferson Morley's the author. The title escaping me, August Rising. But it is about the Key family. And I wondered where Clem was buried, after he got his freedom. And in that book, I found the answer. He is buried down where he had been enslaved, where his family was from. In fact, on one of the properties called Tara Rubin, and I found a sign biking down there, and I'm like, Tara Rubin! Oh my God, Clem Johnson's buried here. Whoa, that was a fun day. This guy, tell me what you know about this guy. Who was he? You saw the movie Lincoln, portrayed by Tommy Lee Jones. And the companion, what's her name? Lydia Hamilton Smith was portrayed by, what was the lady's name, that actress? It starts with an R, and then there's a Mick at the end, McPherson, okay, her. Well, anyway, we're going to talk about Lydia. Thaddeus and Lydia. What do you know about this power couple? Anything? Can anybody help me? Anything about Thaddeus Stevens? Why does he matter?
He owned the ironworks over Caledonia.
He sure did. Named it after Caledonia County, Vermont, where he was from.
Lived here for a little bit, and I think he moved to York after that.
26 years here, went to Lancaster after that. And yeah, he's a staunch Republican, anti-Mason. He had a club foot, and he didn't like the fact that he was discriminated against because they said he wasn't a real man and couldn't support his family. He was, and he had an anti-Mason newspaper, and he wasn't into that cronyism. He believed in equality for everybody. So man, I could talk about him a long time. I read a lot of books about him, fascinating, and lived with a black woman, Lydia Hamilton Smith from Gettysburg. And she knew him. He was a congressman. And he served in D.C. And met with President Lincoln, responsible for the pushing the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Thaddeus Stevens, here in Gettysburg for 26 years, probably the biggest loser in the Battle of Gettysburg, lost more property than any other business owner because the Confederates knew about him, Big Mouth Stevens. And there was a movie, Birth of a Nation, was very racist and it portrayed him and Lydia, and it said that she used her sexual prowess to lure him to do good things for the Negro. It was really that blatant. But really incredible guy. So if you don't know about Thaddeus Stevens, there's a monument erected at our courthouse about him. But really, the Gettysburg College land was his, so you can walk on his land, visit. He owned a lot of property around here, a lot of deeds. His name's on a lot of properties here. The great commoner, buried in a Shriners, a black cemetery in Lancaster. The great commoner, he really, truly said that, losing money wasn't important if slavery would be over. So this gentleman was just incredible, a part of our community for a long time. And this is Lydia Hamilton Smith. So the Hamiltons, where her mother had been, we believe, enslaved there. Her name was O'Neill. Lydia Hamilton Smith. So her name was Hamilton. On the 1858 map near Russell Tavern, you can see the Hamilton farm. There was a house there. I'm not sure that property is still, that the house still stands there, but from near where Russell Tavern, that's where George Washington was here. What was it, 1747, the Whiskey Rebellion, 1797? I don't know, I don't have the year. But Lydia Hamilton Smith, so incredible. I've researched the two of them. I read both their wills, his will and her will. They were so incredible about how they had wishes for flowers on their graves in perpetuity, and he willed her money. She had businesses. She had boarding houses. It said that their homes were stops in the Underground Railroad in Lancaster. There was a preservation effort recently. You can visit those sites in Lancaster. But Lydia Hamilton Smith and Thaddeus Stevens, fascinating. Like I said, they were the power couple back in around the time of the Civil War. And she was married to a man named Joseph Smith. She had sons, one in the USCT, lost a son by a gun accident in her home. She's buried in the Catholic cemetery in Lancaster. But just an incredible couple. There's speculation about the relationship, and I'm not commenting on that. No one knows what goes on behind closed doors. That was a song my mom listened to. So, I'm not going to get into any arguments or any debate about what their relationship was like, but if you read their wills, you will see that there was tenderness and affection, true affection and adoration for each other. Frederick Douglass, what do you know about this guy? You tell me, what do you know? What was he known for? He had been enslaved and he got his freedom. He took it on himself. He said, I'm done. I'm walking. I'm out. And that's the first civil rights movement in America was when the enslaved people just walked. And he was literate. He was able to learn to read and write, which is unusual in Maryland because there were laws that you were not allowed to teach a Negro to read or write. But he wrote things after he got his freedom. What does the 4th of July mean to a Negro? His writings are incredible. He spoke in Gettysburg. He visited Gettysburg more than once. He was not safe to walk the streets of Gettysburg, took his meals in his room. We citizens were not always as accommodating and welcoming as one would think Gettysburg should be, even yet today. So, but his speech was documented in the newspapers, and it was a speech that he had given other places. He compared William of Orange, so if anybody knows British history, killed by his own people, and compared him to Lincoln. And he also said, and this was a very heavily attended speech that he gave at Agricultural Hall in Gettysburg. There's a plaque on corner Franklin and High about it, and there's Frederick Douglass Walkway in Gettysburg, just a sidewalk, but mentioned for him. He compared William of Orange to Lincoln, but what he said, what I read about this that I remember the most, that I find so touching and gripping, he said, if the sainted Lincoln had asked the assassin that fired the bullet, what would he have said to him? And he said, he would have said, Father, forgive him, for he knows not what he does. So it was just, I love that. But he talked about, that there was a comparison between William of Orange and the assassination of Lincoln. And the newspapers were very interesting covering this. It was just like today's Fox News and MSNBC. Depends on what you watch. You might have a completely conflicting opinion of what people watching the other side say. So there was a Democratic newspaper, the Compiler, and the Star and Banner, the Republican newspaper, and they talked about the Democratic newspaper. Why would anybody want to go see Frederick Douglass? There were all these other great speakers and nobody came to see them, and everybody came to see him. The newspaper said there was a car coming from Hanover. That would be a train full of people from Hanover, Pennsylvania, coming to Gettysburg to hear Frederick Douglass. And I think there were African Americans in the audience. We have no letters, not one account of somebody sitting in that room. And I would love to find it. What was it like to be in that room when Frederick Douglass spoke that night in Gettysburg? I think it was February of 1867, I do believe. So you can visit that plaque on the corner of Franklin and High. It's right near, I think it's an M&T Bank, maybe. Little Debbie's High Street Brews is on that same corner. And you can also see a plaque about the colored school at Debbie's High Street Brews. On there is a picture of Amanda Lewis, who was a teacher. John Lewis was friends of Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens. John Lewis escaped slavery in Maryland and said he stayed with his family in Gettysburg. And I'm like, Amanda Lewis. There she is. I don't know for sure, but he was here. Frederick Douglass was in Gettysburg. I mean, who else talks about this? Did you know that? Why don't we know that? Well, but there are attempts to commemorate this, and it's up to us, to remember these things. Anybody know anything about this guy? Well, he was in Gettysburg for 18 months at the Lutheran Theological Seminary. Born free in South Carolina, and an educator, was educated, wanted to educate others, and then South Carolina passed a law that said Negroes cannot be educated. So he left everything he knew and went to New York City, opens up a newspaper and sees an advertisement from this seminary town in South Central Pennsylvania offering a scholarship to a Negro. And he takes it, and he spent 18 months here. He said he was reading books. He wrote his recollection of over 70 years. It is a great read about his time in Gettysburg. He talks about the view of the hills. He walked to Carlisle and back and worked with a lady named Sarah Bell, establishing organizations and societies there, doing the same here, temperance societies, educating people, helping uplift the Negro. So his presence here was short. He also was documented to be at anti-slavery society gatherings. At that time, I think this one was at McAllister's Mill. He was here 1836. So Daniel Alexander Payne, Dr. Payne, he was eulogized by the last slide, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass said, "I shall never forget the soft, sweet voice of Dr. Payne when I first heard him speak." So I would just love to know what his voice was really like. He was a bishop in the AME. He wrote the history of the AME. He wrote hymns. He started a university, Wilberforce in Ohio. Dr. Daniel Alexander Payne, his presence here, only a while, but made improvements with the Negroes. And even, so there's a plaque at the Gettysburg College on Washington Street talking about him. Said he educated the citizens of the town. But I don't think that plaque should be there. I think it should be down at, it used to be owned by Jane and Dave English. Anybody know this big house? It's beautiful now, but it's been acquired by somebody else. I think it's on Middle Street. It was the Academy. That, in 1836, was one of the only buildings that was there. So, I don't think it's marked properly. I think it should be a few blocks down. That's just me, but based on my research. So read about what he says, the view of the mountains, and how he wanted to read every minute while he was there. He had all these books. at his fingertips in the library here at the seminary. But he had an eye problem. And he was reading in a recumbent position, that reading in a recumbent position is not good for the vision. And he had eye pain. He had looked into an eclipse of the sun at one time and had caused problems, and he was reading by candlelight. And then he had severe problems. He had eye pain and had to leave the cemetery because of it. But he has an incredible resume of the things that Dr. Daniel Alexander Payne, one of the few educated Negroes in America and educated here in Gettysburg. Slavery existed. We had slaves here in Adams County. We had slaves till about the 1850s. Pennsylvania passed the Gradual Emancipation Act. Pennsylvania in 1780 said, any child born to an enslaved female, the child will only be enslaved for 28 years if they were born after November 1st, 1780. Born before, you're enslaved for life. So it was very gradual. You see what I'm saying? It took decades for these people to get free or die if you were born before that date, 1780. So slavery existed here. There are slave ads that are incredible that I found in Gettysburg newspapers. If you subscribe to Newspaper Archives and you just search on Adams County, Gettysburg newspapers, slavery, runaway, you get all these ads. And what I learned in looking at the slave ads, the amounts of the rewards were different. The female, the male, what they wore, how it described their scars, and, you know, has one of his hands taken off. And there was one ad in the newspaper here that the jailer put in the newspaper, and it said, Negro man by the name of Charles is in the jail in Adams County. He ran away from, in the deep south. It said the name from William Campbell near Lexington, Kentucky, and I have him in the jail. Somebody get him. We don't want to feed this guy in here forever. We never found out what happened to him, but it also said he walked from Kentucky and had an iron collar about his neck. So that was a metal thing with spikes up in the air that would have been locked on there. The key was with the slave owner. Cumbersome, hard to get off, very difficult circumstances. But there were also abolitionists here, Quakers, in two places, Bendersville and York Springs. And there were free blacks living near them. And they were documented in William Still's book. They were having some very close calls with slave catchers. Nobody here was ever caught, but there was a network of freedom seekers, and there were some white folks in this area. Here is a depiction of what that slave collar would have been like from that man that walked to Adams County. William Still, incredible just information about every runaway slave that he helped in his Philadelphia office. And documented in there was William Wright and Phoebe Wright of York Springs, Quakers, said they aided 1,000 freedom seekers in their York Springs home. Their cousins were Cyrus Grice, who lived right on the other side of Yellow Hill. And he was, Cyrus Grice was married to Cyrus Grice was married to Mary Ann Cook. So these Cook families, Wireman, Grice, Wright, their families were Quakers, and they believed in biblical scripture in Deuteronomy that says, if a slave runs away from his master and comes to you, you should feed him. You should take him in. You should let him live with you. You should not oppress poor people. And if you do, that's a sin in you, and you will not go to heaven. And this is a Victorian era when they thought, we need to follow the scripture. The born-again movement wasn't the thing then, not that last minute, I profess, you had to have an audit trail. You had to live by the scripture. And this argument was used by Quakers who would go down south and tell other Quakers, you can't own people. God doesn't want you to own another person. You shouldn't oppress people and not pay them and have them work so hard for you. So this was the argument, but well documented. If you ever want a really good read, it is The Underground Railroad Record by William Still. One day he's saying to the young man that's in his office seeking his freedom, tell me your name. He said, Peter Still. It was his brother. And they'd been separated when they were children. And actually, a Quaker man died getting Peter Still's wife, trying to get the rest of the family out of freedom. So some Quakers put it all on the line. This is just a great reference. It really doesn't have anything to do with Gettysburg, but I think it's just an awesome story. So here we have Henry Box Brown, who was shipped from Virginia to Philadelphia to William Still's office. It was said that the box arrived and they knew it was coming. And by the way, I'm just going to say this guy's name, J. Miller McKim. J. Miller McKim. It's this guy. He was from Carlisle, right on the other side of the county line. Just an incredible abolitionist. Shows up all over the history books in weird little places. I tell the Cumberland County Historical Society, you need to research him. There's big stuff going on. I tried to find his house and where he lived, but I wasn't able to do it. So back to the story. So I think this is J. Miller McKim. Sorry, this guy. And here's Peter Still. I don't know who these other guys are, but the box arrives and they knocked on the box. Is thee all right? And a voice came back that said, thee is all right. So they pried off the box and out jumps Henry Box Brown. And he had been shipped and he was alive and he had gotten his freedom. So he lived a free life, but the guy who shipped him in Virginia got nailed, was imprisoned, and paid a heavy price for this one. Underground Railroad stop in Gettysburg is McAllister's Mill. We have documented that. I was involved in getting that on the National Park Service, National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. There's just an irony to this, that in 1836 there was an anti-slavery society meeting there. And in 1863, the first dead soldier at the Battle of Gettysburg, what became the Battle of Gettysburg, would be literally right in their field. When George Sanders was killed there, he was the first blood shed in the largest battle in the Western Hemisphere, or in the battle over slavery. And it was at a place where there had been dialogue, people talking. We should really get rid of this slavery thing. It's really not a good thing for us as having a free land and having a whole entire race of people that we're trying to enslave, and we're not sure if they should be citizens and what their rights should be. So, and a great story that came out of McAllister's Mill, that it was a two-story mill, so there was a bottom part, top part, and it said that old man McAllister was there with a slave catcher in the mill one night, and the slave catcher is upstairs interrogating him about that incident, and he says, I believe maybe that, what would you say if I said that I think that you have slaves hiding here in your mill? And James McAllister took his cane and said, I'd say, run boys, run, run boys, run. So supposedly that's the story that came out of that mill. But it's, there's a great painting by Brad Schmiel of freedom seekers there at the mill at night. It hangs on my wall. Here's good old rough. James McAllister said too that he had sons that were imprisoned and served, several sons for the Union Army. Too said that it would be a small price to pay if slavery would be over at the end of this horrible conflict. And again, an anti-slavery society meeting at his site down there at the mill. This is the Grist House on the Quaker Valley Road near Biglerville. They were aiding with the Wrights, helping freedom seekers. And they were working with the Matthews up on Yellow Hill. Their sons were helping start the fruit growing industry. Black sons of Ed Matthews, the Underground Railroad agent on Yellow Hill. His sons were living on the nursery and in the tannery of the Grist families, living with those families, starting the industries, and especially working at the first commercial nursery here at Cyrus Grist. So Cyrus was an agent in the Underground Railroad, a white guy, a Quaker, but had when Kitty Payne was kidnapped, he and some other Quakers went down to Virginia to try to secure her freedom. He paid $100 to have her get an attorney in 1845. $100. In 1845, he paid to get her defended in court. So there are great stories about these friends, and that's where he's buried today, at the Manal Friends meeting. And here's a good depiction of these Quakers, and because they were here, and it's Fergus Bordewick said in his book, The Underground Railroad, The War for the Soul of America, that wherever there were Quakers living, the Underground Railroad seemed to emerge. It just happened to be where they were, just by coincidence. you know, it was a little more than a coincidence. And again, proof that Cyrus Grace had living on his property Sam Matthews, and he was the son of Ed and Annie. Here's Hiram Grace, who had a tannery and was a farmer right on Route 34 at the Quaker Valley Road. And he did this, and you see this is the B for black. And I knew that name, Nelson Matthews. I'm like, uh-oh, this is a white family with this young 18-year-old black male living right on their property with them, proving they trusted and had relationships with each other. If any of you have read the amazing William Frazanito's early photography at Gettysburg, hands up, yeah? Then you know about Gettysburg photographer Charles Tyson. His wife, Mariah, was the daughter of Cyrus Grace. And here is a picture of Charles Tyson and Mariah. And they are, I think that's their daughter Edith. I think she's here, a little hard to see. Oh, look here. Well, I was like, when I found this photo, I was like, ooh, who's he? And then I found him on the census. Frederick. He was listed with them. But a servant. And again, Huntington Friends near York Springs. And interestingly, William Wright and Phoebe Wright are buried there, and so is their son, General William Wireman Wright, who helped Sherman be victorious in the March of the Sea in the fall of Atlanta, because he had U.S. colored troops, black men, that he was leading. He had met black men in his home. There was a black man that came through their home named James Pembroke, and he wrote a book, The Fugitive Blacksmith, and talked about going through the Wright House, and that they taught him to read and write. Here's William Wright from that book. Helped 1,000 runaway slaves in their York Springs home. This is crumbles. I have a brick from that I took to the Historical Society on one of my past visits there. Kidnappings. Now, these kidnappings happened. I've documented a bunch of them. Less than 20 people that I found were kidnapped or attempted to be kidnapped. And this Kitty Payne story is pretty compelling. So it starts in Virginia. Kitty Payne was born in the slave quarters on the Maddox property. And shortly after, the enslaved female gave birth to the light-skinned child, Mary Maddox knew that her husband was the father. The slave owner had impregnated the female slave. Kitty is born. They called her Catherine or Kitty. And Mr. Maddox's wife said, well, the child can stay, but the mother has got to go. So she was sold away. Kitty grows up, gets her freedom, is allowed to marry, has children, comes to Pennsylvania to live after she's manumitted, and her cousin and 4 other men kidnap her from Bendersville's Bear Mountain, July 24th, 1845. And they dragged them back to slavery. She was manumitted. She was freed according to the law in Virginia and Pennsylvania, but kidnapped. So she had a long ordeal. She was in the Rappahannock jail for about over 300 days. Her and her children were put in jail till they could figure out what to do. And that's when Cyrus Grace had paid the money to try to get her a trial, and she was finally defended and freed again. It's because they were contending his will said, all my property goes to my wife Mary, but whatever, and she can do whatever she wants with everything, and whatever's left shall go to my nephew. And the nephew was mad because he wanted the slaves. So he kidnapped them. And he paid a lot of money to other people to kidnap him, and then he had to defend himself in court. And it ended because the jailer was billing the nephew the cost to feed Kitty and the children in jail. And that was just too much. He's like, oh. And he wanted to sell her and the children for collateral on his debts. And he just gave up. Now, she's returned to Adams County to live. She had lived near the Fairfield area, but she was taken from Frog Hollow. We know James Wilson was a gentleman who testified on her behalf. This incident was heavily covered in the newspapers. There was a lot. Oops, what did I do? I must have touched something wrong. Uh-oh. Well, okay, you're being pretty persnickety. Okay, how about next? Oh, I don't want to mess it up. Okay, there we go. So yeah, heavily documented in the newspapers. So when she's kidnapped, she had these 3 children. And then after the kidnapping, I found the 3 children in 3 different townships with 3 different families. 2 of them I was familiar with because Tudor is a Quaker from Huntingdon, white folks, and John Wright was a Quaker from Manalapan. And then I was a little perplexed by why is Eliza down here with this guy, William Campbell? And it's spelled Camel, but it's Campbell, like the soup. And they're buried at Presbyterian near Hunterstown. Was that Great Conewago? Presbyterian is where the Campbell family is buried. Eliza was with that family through the Battle of Gettysburg. She was down there when good old Custer and the Wolverines were having a little cavalry skirmish down around Hunterstown. She lived there. And she was in the house hiding under the bed when a Confederate came in the house because she knew she could be taken back by them to slavery. So sad. The 2 daughters did reunite and live together later in Kansas. Their son, Arthur Payne, enlisted in the U.S. Colored Troops and was in the Navy. But they were kidnapped, enslaved. They had been enslaved, freed, kidnapped, jailed, freed again, separated from their siblings, and Kitty it seems that she killed herself. Died of sadness is what a book written by her family says. And Kitty died of sadness. To me, that's just depression, not able to eat, not able to want to live. And the reason they said was because she married Abraham Bryan, took care of his kids to his previous marriage. His second wife, she was the second wife, first wife had died. She wanted to bring her children there, and he said no. And that she wanted her children back together. So the sad saga of Kitty or Catherine Payne, but very much has little footprints all over the county with her children living here and there. And just an interesting, I'll just add this one side note. So here's one of her children. Here's when Kitty or Catherine, when she's on the census. She did die in 1850, but she's listed on that census as a 39-year-old female. Little Frances married a black man that she met at a reunion in Gettysburg. And he said at one time he guarded Jefferson Davis. So he was working for the Confederacy. So another interesting aspect of American history. So 2 of Abraham Bryan's daughters married black men from the South. I find that kind of interesting, So I have this stupid fantasy that the kids were, they weren't even in the house at the time of the battle. But if they were in there. Oh, I'm really scared. It's really scary. All these bombs and everything. And when this is over, I'm going to go out there and find me a husband. But, I know they weren't thinking that. But I just find the irony of that. Anna married James Madison, and he escaped from South Carolina with another enslaved man. So great stories, just little things we hadn't heard about. And here's good old Abraham Bryan with his 3rd wife, Elizabeth. And there we see Frances again. But she was the child of Kitty. Here's one of Kitty's children that was kidnapped, Eliza. And this is Mary. And again, they were reunited and lived in Kansas. She's buried at Lincoln Cemetery. Catherine Bryan. And the Matthews family are there at Lincoln Cemetery as well. And the Biggs family. This is another interesting family. You've heard about Anna DeVere Smith finding her roots in Gettysburg. Did anybody catch that? Anna has done appearances and for the Historical Society. Well, that would be because of my little book there. There's a reference in there to Basil Biggs. And Henry Louis Gates' staff found my book by searching online. It was digitalized somehow, and they found and called me. And how thrilled was I when the staff of Skip Gates is calling my phone number. But I was happy to be a credit on when he showed Anna DeVere Smith her roots, that she's related to Basil Biggs. And I had the thrill of meeting her recently when she was appearing here. But Biggs and his son, they were both veterinarians, William, his son, and they were caring for one of the Matthews children. I found orphan court records. So these families were acquainted, knew each other, probably related we think, in Maryland. But this is a reference to memorial service. This is about Yellow Hill, Fairmount Church, at what we know to be today's Yellow Hill. And this is the house on Yellow Hill, and a relative of Ed Matthews, my dear friend Alicia Wansel Sanders. And she is there at the ancestral home of her great-grandfather, Ed Matthews. So this church on Yellow Hill, we learn, was consecrated in 1869, and the 1870 census records for the black families in Butler and Manalapan Township had this little check mark over here. And up on the column it says, attended school. And all these children were attending school in 1870. And I think that I know where. Because church for black people was school. Church was a building where you would learn your numbers. Sunday school was learning your letters and numbers. So the little bits and pieces. 3 of Ed Matthews' sons left Yellow Hill to enlist in the U.S. Colored Troop, all in the 127th unit all together. And Ed, his son, William, died young of his injuries, leaving his daughter, Jessie, as an orphan. Here's a stone from Yellow Hill. I had Tim Smith dig this out a long time ago, huh? See how his hair is light, or much lighter today. But he's been my pal for a long time. I bribed him with beer at the mines to learn about George Sandow. No lie, I'm like, how am I gonna learn about this dead Civil War guy? I know, I'm gonna buy the historians beer, find out where they drink. It worked. And they told me Fresnito was at the mines, and so that's what I did. But Tim crawled in the closet and pulled that out. Sad story behind this stone, though. There's another stone taken from Yellow Hill of John Naylor in 1887. And in the middle of that is a mother who buried a child and a husband within several months of each other. Her name is Luella. We found out, though, that she remarried and had other kids. Jesse Ellen Matthews Van. If any of you have any roots to Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh people here? No Pittsburgh people? But there's a historical marker to her husband. He was a publisher of the Pittsburgh Courier, became the #1 Negro newspaper in America. And little Jesse Ellen Matthews Van of the Matthews family of Yellow Hill took over that newspaper in 1938 when her husband died. And it said that her husband was influencing black voters to support the Democratic Party, to turn your picture of Lincoln to the wall that Frederick Douglass told families that they should have in their living rooms after the Civil War. And her husband, Jesse's husband, she's the one on the left, Bob Van said, turn your picture of Lincoln to the wall, support the Democratic Party. Interestingly, though, his wife stayed loyal to the Republicans after his death. She did graduate from Harrisburg High. She's on there. I know not which one. This is Bob Van. He dressed every day as if he might see the president. And he kept his hair slicked back. People didn't know really his ethnicity. I think they thought maybe he looked Indian. I mean, he kind of does to me. But he was a Pullman porter and studied to become an attorney. And he got stocks from the Courier from one of his customers and became more and more involved with the newspaper. I was lucky enough to be inside that house at Oakmont. And he could not golf at Oakmont. He was a good golfer, Bob Van, but he was not allowed to golf at that fine facility. They were on national boards of the NAACP, League of Christians and Jews. Her life story was told on Ralph Edwards' This Is Your Life. Jesse Ellen Matthews Van. I think something should be named for her in this community. Incredible. Another power couple. Who's that little girl he's with? This is the book and the historical marker in Pittsburgh. 3rd and Franklin, I think, is where you'll find that marker. Here's Jesse with Eleanor Roosevelt. And Bob Van served under FDR, but found it was just a token appointment. He was given an office and a phone that never rang. And he got sick of the commute. He had a bad accident on the highway, and he finally quit. But Jesse Ellen Matthews Van, just incredible lady that I had the pleasure of getting to know. And great story about her. Here she is. She represented the United States. Eisenhower appointed her, a female, in the 1950s to represent the United States U.S. aid. What Doge cut, she was involved in that way back then. And here she is. This is now when she died in 1967. I just love this. I think it's adorable. Robert Van died in 1938. She died 30 years later in 1967. And here they are in heaven together again. It's been a long time, Jesse. So we're pretty thrilled about here. Here's our boy Basil Biggs again, right in his obituary. That's published in the Gettysburg Times. It said he was an Underground Railroad agent, and he took runaways to Ed Matthews of the Quaker Valley. That's a lot of the documentation that I have for Yellow Hill. And African Americans in this area, up in the Upper Adams area, Butler, Manalapan Township, I found some occupations: forgeman, wood chopper. They're involved in the iron making industry. Anybody know Troy Harmon? Licensed battlefield, worked for the National Park Service. And he did his dissertation on black labor in iron furnaces. And I remember him asking me, thinking, he's like, do you think I have some here? I'm like, you absolutely do. Look at the Mars and Butler families. They were working there. And I looked at the company. You know how the song goes, lost my soul at the company store or whatever? It was for real. 2 families had property here and worked at Laurel Forge, Pine Grove Furnace today. And Aaron Mars died. And so this Mars family is well documented and connected up there. But they were still dirt poor. And I found, the charges for other stuff they needed to live, food and shoes and stuff like that, was way more than they earned. I found his wages and how much he earned, and I did the math, and I'm like, oh man, it's true. It's really true. It's only one step up from slavery. And the National Cemetery. So there are 2 black men buried there. Do you know about them? Do you know who they are? One is named Henry Gooden, and the other's name's Charles Parker. Charles Parker had been buried at Yellow Hill. His body was taken from there, and he was disinterred. His body placed at the National Cemetery. Here's Charles Parker. When I reviewed this today, I was like, why do I have this slide in here? And now I remember. Her diary. You know Sally Myers? Her diary. Do you remember what she says? What do we know about the black community in Gettysburg? Do you remember any of her entries on that? What she called them? The darkies are skedaddling. They're taking everything they can carry and they're running for their lives. This was June 26th, when George Sando met his early death. The black people were terrorized that the Confederates were in the area, just scared to death. Very, very scared. And Mag Palm, she was a victim of a kidnapping attempt, 3 men. Mag says she bit the thumb off one of those kidnappers. No. She took matters into her own teeth. And so I don't know if she bit it off, but I'm thinking she yanked on it pretty hard. She let him remember her. She did name those 3 men. I have the court documents from her naming Ferdinand Buckingham, Philip Snyder, Adam, somebody. They all got acquitted. They said they had alibis. They lied. We think they lied. We think they did it, but they got away with it. So a lot of African Americans in Gettysburg, 100 black men we've documented in the U.S. colored troops. And some of them weren't from Pennsylvania. Some of them were from the South. I love that story. And one of the black men that we know about that came through Gettysburg is a guy named Richard Jordan. He's buried up in Mount Holly Springs. He said that he was brought from Georgia with a Confederate officer to Gettysburg. And somehow he escaped. So who were the stretcher bearers? Probably the black people, right? That's not the most desirable job. And the cooks and the teamsters. And it's possible maybe he was just kind of, looking for bodies and just kept on walking. And found his way to a black community in Mount Holly and then joined the U.S. colored troops and fought against the Confederates. and lived later and had children, and I think he was a member of the GAR up there. Nelson Royer, another black man that has been documented. I think he served with a man, Dr. Tate, is his story. Owen Robinson, this guy lived to be over 100 years old. And he was pretty sharp with making money. In the summer, he had an ice cream shop, and in the winter, he had an oyster shop. So he's a restaurant owner and businessman. Owen Robinson lived to be over 100. One day, I worked at the state capitol, and Tim Smith called me, and Deb, can you, or I don't know, probably email. I don't even know. It was so long ago. We probably didn't even have texting. But he said he wanted this article, and I worked next door to the state library, and it was about Owen Robinson turning 100. And they asked him, you know, how'd you live so long? And he said, well, I lit the pipe of my mother. I'd light her pipe at night for her. That's why I lived a long time. And he also said, I slept on the grounds hunting possum. And if you want to live a long time, sleep outside hunting possum. And the Gettysburg Address. So, you know, what a memorial to Gettysburg, the greatest speech in the history of the world, delivered at my birthplace. It makes me really proud. It really does. And I love being born in Gettysburg. I think that we've really come a long way. We got a little ways to go, and I think equality is really an awesome thing when everybody has it. So I think that's around. Oh, Abe, there's good old Abe. And you know that he walked in Gettysburg with his servant, William Johnson, when they came on the train. It was his black servant was with him. And you know, didn't he wake up Seward at the middle of the night? Didn't he get woken up to talk about the Gettysburg Address? Who would have been the person doing that? His servant, probably. So they're having a reenactment on that. And I'm hoping that we will see this depicted properly with Abe Lincoln reenactor and the William Johnson reenactor along with them. But there you go. So lots of African American history in Gettysburg. Lots for you to learn about, to read more about. Thaddeus Stevens, Dr. Daniel Alexander Payne, some of the people that I've mentioned, Frederick Douglass' recollection, or Daniel Payne's recollection of over 70 years. He's very eloquent with his words. And he also talks in there, it's interesting, he says, the black people of Gettysburg frustrate me. He said, we have ample opportunity to educate them, and they're not taking advantage of these opportunities. He said the reason is they're constantly leaving. They're in Gettysburg, and then they go to York, and then they go to Chambersburg, and then they come back, and then they go to Harrisburg, and then they come back. And that they just weren't serious. And it's right in there. He expresses his concern for that. But great stories, hoping that you enjoyed your evening. Are there any questions?
Do you know the number of freed blacks that were captured by the Army of Northern Virginia during the invasion?
We know that the newspapers documented it, and we know from, I think it was Kent Masterson's Brown's book that talked about the withdrawal and the number of wagons of the wounded, and at the end, the number of black people in tow. And it was in the newspaper when George Sando, June 26th, I looked heavily at those newspapers, and it said they were taken from Chambersburg and Waynesboro, free blacks. How many? But people were displaced. They said there were families in Gettysburg who fled during the battle that never came back. And, you know, so some may have come here from other places to escape what was going on there. And it's hard because literacy is a problem, not a lot of letters. And they weren't allowed to sue in court for the most part. That's why Mag Palm pressing charges when she did in the 1850s was pretty impressive. She wasn't even a citizen being in Africa. She was born free in Adams County. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for your attention tonight. Thank you. And let's thank our staff for her excellent service tonight as well. The food was very, very good. Thank you. Thank you so much.